Happy New Year, everyone. Hope you had a great time playing video games over the holiday break. I myself spent a lot of time playing Xenoblade Chronicles X, so I'd like to take some time to tell you how I feel about it now that I've completed the story and passed the 100-hour mark. First off, I'll have to say that I didn't complete the entirety of the first Xenoblade Chronicles. I was introduced to it by a friend not too long after it had come out, and I watched him play many parts of it, and I played a few myself, but I never actually got around to purchasing the game considering how hard it was to find for a while. But I really liked how they combined Western RPG elements with the Japanese aesthetic and flow, so I was eagerly awaiting Monolith's next game ever since it was first announced. And all things considered, I'm really not sure this was meant to be considered as a sequel to Xenoblade Chronicles. I think using its title was more just for brand recognition than anything else, since that game was a big cult hit. But it really only borrows gameplay mechanics, which are pretty different now. They've made a lot of advancements. The setting and everything else has been completely thrown away, which is not a bad thing because that game was pretty open and close. If the first Xenoblade was supposed to be reminiscent of 90s JRPGs, then this game definitely feels more like it's from the early 2000s. But I mean that in aesthetic and story only. The gameplay is absolutely cutting edge. It feels more like they were trying to take the elements from MMOs that are good and get rid of all the fat. For instance, if you're grinding for money and XP in this game for extended periods of time, then something is probably wrong. There's been a lot of conveniences implemented to make that something you won't have to worry about. But that's not to say that the mechanics aren't still very complicated. For instance, there's a whole system dedicated to launching mining probes on the planet that will increase your minerals. Wait, no, not that one. This one. Okay, this system enables you to get money and rare resources just by running around over time. It's not the kind of thing you'll ever have to grind for because it's completely passive and stacks on top of whatever you're doing. But this system will only benefit you if you take the time to figure out how it works and mess around with it. Seriously, this is the first game in a long time that I've had to read the manual extensively to try to figure things out. The game isn't exactly the best at explaining stuff, but it isn't that hard to pick up as you play. Still, I would recommend everybody check out the electronic manual, as it's going to just stop you from scratching your head a lot of the time during the first few hours. Despite some of the obtuseness that this game has, there's nothing abstract about what makes this game tick for me. All of the exploring. While it doesn't have the density of, say, a Bethesda game world, it makes up for it in sheer volume. It may be huge, but every segment is packed with some kind of interesting thing to find, whether it's treasure, a secret cave, or a particularly challenging mini-boss. And all the while you'll be looking at some very interesting art design. While it's true that the environments in this game do adhere to standard video game zone logic, the aesthetics often have this great alien charm that helps them feel different from the things you've seen before. In that regard, there's a lot more impressive visuals than, say, Fallout or Elder Scrolls. And there's a lot more to the world than just the visuals, it's also how you get around. Early in the game, you'll be very thankful that there's an auto-run function, enabling you to sprint around and jump up rocks in an effort to just get as far from your starting city as you possibly can. And then you'll turn around and realize you didn't get that far after all. But as you branch out and discover new areas, you'll see just how different getting around each one can be. For instance, you'll be doing a lot of jumping in Noctilum. But then that all totally changes by the time you get one of this game's biggest features, the mechs. First off, you may have heard that it can take between 30 and 40 hours of playtime to finally unlock these things, and that's pretty much true in my case. They're not really treated as mandatory until the finale of the game, but you absolutely should try to get these things as quickly as you can. Early adopters will feel the enormous benefit that they provide in combat and how they totally change getting around the game world. With a Skell, you can jump higher than you ever could before and can reach things you maybe just couldn't. And then eventually you get the ability to fly, which completely changes the way you explore. More than anything, these robots led to the reveal of some pretty great secrets that I don't even want to spoil in this video. Just see for yourself. I haven't had as much fun exploring a game world in a very long time. But I have to also mention that the sense of discovery isn't limited to physically exploring. There's a lot of points in the game where quests will lead to things I just never would have expected. This game makes doing every single quest feel really satisfying because they can lead to some pretty great things, like maybe a new alien faction factions showing up and creating an arms manufacturer, which leads to new gear, which then leads to that alien race populating the town, which then leads to an untold number of additional new quests that can grow even bigger once new alien races show up that interact with those races to lead to even more quests. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Look, that enough is basically what sold me on this game. But it's a JRPG, so we have to talk about one of the most important elements of a JRPG, the story. Like other Xeno games, this game tries to deal with a lot of very complex themes at once. In that regard, it's definitely not as subdued as the first Xenoblade. And because of that, it's probably why this game isn't quite able to use all of those themes as effectively. There were definitely some pretty interesting things in this game, including those trademark twists that are so crazy that they kind of work. And this time around they happen earlier than you might expect. But ultimately, I think the story was surprisingly small for the size of what it was trying to convey. This is probably because there just aren't that many story missions in the game. Probably because of the massive increase in side stories that you can do. Which is okay, I understand that. And it just goes to show how exploring and doing your own thing can sometimes be a lot more satisfying. Not only is the main story too small for its themes, but it's also too small for its party. The previous game had a party of 7. Now you have 18 or so party members you can choose from, and the differences between them are not nearly as significant. It's an odd move because I think only 3 or 4 of the total characters actually have any real time in the story, and it creates a bit of a problem because every single story mission will require you to bring 2 specific party members on them, and it serves to make the story feel like it's more about them than you. The problem is that any other party member you bring with them doesn't have any dialogue whatsoever. They didn't take the Mass Effect route with this one. They just stand around awkwardly. Yes, all these characters have fleshed out side stories that can be entertaining to do, but I really wish that they'd found a better way to integrate them into the overall story and might have even served to make the story longer. That might sound like a pretty big problem for this kind of game, but there's something that actually bothers me a hell of a lot more. The text size in this game is ridiculously small a lot of the time. It makes me have Dead Rising 1 flashbacks. There's a lot of information that they're trying to convey to you, but it's really pointless if you can't read it. At the very least, I wish there was some kind of option for this in the menu, and it's weird that there isn't considering that you can modify the HUD quite a bit. When you're playing this game, make sure you find the perfect sitting position. Your eyes will thank you. Lastly, I want to talk about something I don't usually discuss, which would be the music for the game. I found it to be very hit or miss. There's a lot of tracks that I definitely enjoy quite a bit, mostly the ones when you're exploring the planet, and some of the battle tunes. But I think my issue is mostly with the fact that there was this weird reliance on vocal tracks that otherwise didn't need to be there. The big issue is that the vocals aren't particularly great, and when you actually listen to the lyrics, they're kind of terrible. It really makes me yearn for those delicious Knuckles raps back in the day. I'm not sure that it was the best decision they could have made when doing the music, and I know it's something that a lot of fans might be upset about because the first Xenoblade had a particularly fantastic soundtrack. I'm not sure that that style of music would have worked here, but I think that overall this could have been much better. I mean, it leaves a really bad impression initially because the tracks you're going to be hearing the most in this game are some of the worst. There's also a bit of a problem with the audio sometimes being louder than the dialogue, which is something that could easily be fixed if there were any audio options in the menu, which is particularly strange to me. Again, there are plenty great tracks too, but when they're bad, they're pretty bad. And there were many points where I got distracted during a cutscene because of the music kicking in. Look, if you have a Wii U and you like RPGs, pick up this game. Were there even any RPGs on the Wii U before this? I don't know, just go get it, please. It's one hell of an adventure, but it can be pretty intimidating for people who don't play these kinds of games, so if you're a more casual person, I definitely give it some thought. Nintendo's actually put out a pretty useful series of videos on their YouTube channel that can help explain the game mechanics, so check that out if you're on the fence. When I think back to a lot of 2015's games, I think of the idea of an open world being used for something different. And as far as I'm concerned, you can put Xenoblade X right up there with Metal Gear Solid 5 and The Witcher 3 as games that are trying to reinvent the way you explore an open world. And that could perhaps be the biggest praise I could give this game. You owe it to yourself to give it a shot.